Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started for time's sake. So thank you for joining us, first of all. My name is Aaron Shaheen. I'm the Community Involvement Coordinator for the Tinkham Garage Superfund site from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, or for short, we just call it EPA. Tonight, we're going to be presenting the proposed plan for the Tinkham Garage Superfund site, and I understand that some of you have been waiting a long time for this, so we want to say that we appreciate your patience. Before I go any further into the presentation, I just want to lay out a few ground rules to make sure things run smoothly here. We're going to ask that everyone holds their questions until the end of the presentation. Should be about 40 minutes or so. We're scheduled to be here until 7:30. I won't keep the staff here late, but if we need to stay a little bit later, we'll be here to answer your questions. So we just ask, hold those until the end, and we'll make sure to get to everyone that has a question. I'll repeat this at the end when we get there, but when we have questions, I ask that we respect each other's time and allow everyone to ask a question, especially those who live within the areas that are impacted, because this meeting is for the community, but it is most important for people that are impacted by the site. And also during that time, we want to keep things appropriate and related to the project. We understand that you may have questions that are unrelated to the project that you're just looking for a resource to ask. We may be able to point you in the right direction, but for time's sake and, to respect everyone's time, this meeting is for you. We're happy to put this on, but it really is to be informational, so you have a better idea of what the proposed plan is for the site. So we just ask that we try to keep the questions, related to the project, and if you want to ask us after the Q&A one-on-one about something that we might be able to answer, or we can direct you to the right resource. So now I'm going to do some introductions. So we're going to start. Cheryl Sprague is the product manager from EPA, who's right next to me. As I said, my name is Aaron Shaheen. I am the community involvement coordinator from EPA. Next, I'll just go in order here, but actually, let's go. Next to Cheryl is Jin Sukup, who's from Western Solutions. He is a contractor that provides technical support for us. And then on the end is Renee Nalick, who's from New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. So she's our state partner, and we work with her on oversight. And then in the back, we have people from New Hampshire DES's Environmental Health Program. We have Kelly Thurbolton Hunter, Sarah Boyle, and Kimberly Aviato. So their role here tonight is to assist in answering any health-related questions you have, and their expertise is in health assessment, risk analysis, toxicology, and health education. So this is just a quick agenda for the meeting. So introductions, we did that. Now we're on the agenda. I'm going to briefly talk about the Superfund process and community involvement, and then we're going to talk about this history and timeline for Tinkham Garage and what's happened. We'll talk about the conceptual site model and recent investigation findings, risk, focused feasibility study, what everyone is primarily here for, the proposed plan, and then we'll do questions at the end. So this is a quick meeting summary. So if you were thinking about taking a 40-minute nap while we present, just listen to this one slide and then you can take that nap after. But we're here to talk about, the presentation is a summary of the 32-page proposed plan that we have. The plan presents an interim action to mitigate exposure from contaminated groundwater used as drinking water. We are going to be seeking public comment starting tomorrow for 30 days, which we'll talk about more. Like I said, this is to help clarify things about the plan. So if you would like to make a comment, you can make an informed comment and we can help answer questions, things like that. Next is a snapshot of where we are now, but currently there's 66 residential properties that have been offered bottled water since monitoring began in 2018 as a temporary measure. And this proposed plan presents a permanent water line extension to residents that are living within Ross, Tocquenol, and the Boston, Albany, and Charleston neighborhoods who are not already connected to a water line. The primary supporting documents are found in the administrative record. That just means that is just a record of all the documents that supported the decision that we're proposing. And they're added to the town's website. If you're curious where that is, you can ask me. Kirsten knows where that is. She helped us set it up. So you can talk to us after and I can show you where to find that. But it has the proposed plan on there. It's going to have this presentation. It has, their investigation documents and other things like that. So that'll be there. And then finally, just a little bit kind of what's to moving forward a bit, but site investigations are still ongoing and additional cleanup action at the site may be warranted, and we present at a later date. So a little bit back, we said interim action, meaning that this is just before we would move into cleaning up groundwater, this is an interim action to mitigate risk. So that's why we said interim. So there could be more investigations in the future to kind of look at groundwater. So that's kind of the meeting summary. So this is the Superfund process, community involvement that I was just talking about. So there's many steps in the Superfund process, and this is what EPA uses to clean up sites. It comes from a law, and the acronym for that is CERCLA. That's how the Superfund process was created. So I say that just because this is the same process we follow for all Superfund sites, and we did the same thing here. So, these steps include investigations, remedy selection, design, construction, operation, maintenance, 5-year reviews. You can see kind of on that roadmap, there's list all the steps that go for a Superfund site. And the original remedy for the site happened in 80s and 90s. And then in 2003, it went into long-term monitoring. During that time, EPA uses it to track whether the remedy is effective in decreasing the level of contaminants. And we also use that time to identify any emerging contaminants that sometimes require us to go back and repeat the process. And that is why we are back now. So during that long-term monitoring, we discovered 2 emerging contaminants, 1,4-dioxane and PFAS, which you probably have heard about a lot. And ultimately, the goal of any remedy is to be protective of human health and the environment. And you can see on the screen just highlights some of the major portions of the Superfund process. And if you have questions about that, I'll go into more detail after, but I want to focus on the proposed plan because I think that's what everyone is here for. So now I'm going to pass it over to Cheryl.
All right. All right. Again, I'm going to thank you all for coming. I know I've spoken to many residents while we've been out at the site over the past few years, and we appreciate all the cooperation we've received. And we're excited that we're here tonight. I'm going to be putting my glasses on and off. I can see my papers, but not the screen with my glasses, so I might be doing this quite a bit. And then I have to use 2 hands to use the pointer, so this is going to get a little complicated, but we're going to do it. What I'm going to start off with is just giving you a diagram. This is a current Google map, and one of the things that I've noticed as we've been on the site for a few years here is that this site is very large. There's multiple sites in New Hampshire. Most of the sites are not this large. This has multiple components to it, multiple areas to it, and sometimes I find that residents aren't familiar, that they're familiar with their own impacted area, but not necessarily understanding where all the areas are. So I'm just going to define what the areas of the site are. So this red rectangle here, what I can do in the red here, rectangle here, this is the original Tinkham Garage property. It was a little bit larger than the property that is now there because there's been development over a portion of it. However, this is the original Tinkham Garage property at the site. In 1970s, there were developments that proceeded, and this green circle on this area, this is the former Lexington Green apartments, which are now the Woodland Village condominiums. This is a 13-unit condominiums. They have associated leach fields. This is an area where disposals happened at the site. This yellow oval, this is Mercury and McAllister. These are individual residential houses that were also an area of impact in the early portions of the cleanup. This large green rectangle up in this northeast corner, that was originally part of the Tinkham Garage site. As the sites move on, we like to see development happen, and in 2001, the Home Depot development occurred. And so this is actually part of the site, the Home Depot development, I think, except for the gas station up in the corner, but that is actually part of the site. One of the things I'll just point out is a former source area, which we'll discuss a little later, is actually located partially underneath the back corner of the Staples parking lot. This is what happens in development, and over time, the site's been, in existence for 40 plus years. This pink area, this large pink area, that's the center of the site. There's about 90 to 100 acres in the middle. This was developed as a Nevins, which is an over 55 development. The right portion of it is a wetland that has stayed conservation land for the town. Collectively, these are the portions of the area that has been considered the site since the beginning of it. This is where most of the investigations have focused. This is where most of the restoration has focused up until now. The reason we're here tonight is we want to focus on two other properties that are going to be associated with the site. And the first one is this yellow square here. This is the Boston, Charleston, Albany neighborhood. It's southeast of the Tinkham Garage site, as well as this blue rectangle here, which is residential properties along Ross and Tocquenel. We have Gale and Gilchrist. So collectively, these are the target neighborhoods that we came here tonight to talk about. Oops. All right, site history. I'm going to give a brief site history. There's more information in one of our documents called the Remedial Investigation Summary Memorandum. There's far more information that we can present tonight. So tonight we're giving you a snapshot of the site history. So originally this land that we now call the site, 375 acres is the site, was originally agricultural sand and gravel operations. In the 1970s, as I mentioned, developments happened, the condominiums and the various neighborhoods that surround the site. During the 1970s, John Tinkham operated a Tinkham Enterprises, which is essentially a truck tanker operations, where he would haul septic waste from facilities, then to dispose of them at POTWs or whatnot, and then he would come back and he would wash the tanker trucks out at the property. So a lot of the disposals that happened in the beginning record because he was washing his properties, his tankers. That's what he was doing with his operations. And these disposals happened in the leach fields and in the dug trenches. It's hard to see on this, but there are hash marks where we can see in older pictures the trenches that were used where he would dump the materials in. We also, and I'm trying to make this shorter on the history, we also know that Mr. Tinkham hauled industrial waste for a man named Sylvester, and this came from waste from companies in Massachusetts. They were supposed to be sent for treatment. This company then ended up distributing these wastes. Some of them came to two other sites in Massachusetts. Most of the waste that we understand John Tinkham hauled was to a site in Nashua, New Hampshire. That site is now a Superfund site as well. It is called the Sylvester Gilson Road site. And what he would do is he would haul the materials to the site in Nashua, bring the trucks back, and yet again, rinse the materials out. And those materials would be deposited in areas such as the leach fields, into trenches that would go into those numerous streams that run through the condos, as well as into the ground, which would be just to the east of the Tinkham Garage. In 1978, the state received an initial complaint from a resident on Ross Drive. Now, if you live on the site, if you live in the neighborhoods, you know there's a lot of streams that come through the site, through the neighborhood. So one of the residents called and made a complaint because the stream next to their property was foamy, smelly, and their well was contaminated. The state did an investigation and it determined that the septics and the waste disposed in the fields behind the Tinkham Garage were spilling over and they were migrating into the fields. This actual picture from 1984 does show some of the impacts of the contamination. Now, the ground at the Tinkham Garage field is not very thick. There's only about 15 feet covering the bedrock. So you've got these trenches, they're getting disposed of, it's not a permeable material, and they're moving off and running into the wetlands and into the surface water streams at this point. The state made them clean it up. They diverted the stream away from the Ross Drive residential property. And in 1980, EPA came in and initiated some investigations. So what they found in the initial investigations is they found volatile organic chemicals in soils and groundwater. So VOCs is a generic term for a class of compounds. Typically, we associate them with industrial solvents, industrial chlorinated solvents used in numerous industries, electronics, plating, etc. So we have contamination in the Tinkham Garage area where we know there was disposals, downgrading of the leach fields where there was also disposals. The other thing that they found initially between 1980 and 1982 was contamination in the public water supply well for the condominium area and in residential wells on Mercury and McAllister. In 1983, EPA placed the site on the national priority list, which means it could be addressed via Superfund, and that promises the cleanup and the financial backing to do so. The first order of action was in 1983. EPA and the state cooperated and extended a water line to secure alternative water for the condominium area and the residents on Mercury and McAllister. So, as I said, this site's had operations on it for a very long time, and there's been an extensive amount of work done at the site, investigations performed at the site. So I've tried to narrow down the most important topics on 2 pages of a timeline, just to give you an idea of what happened and when. So as I said, 1970s is when we understood that materials were brought to the site and released to the ground in various areas. In 1983, the water line is replaced for the condominium and the Mercury McAllister residential properties. That was a very important step because it allowed the investigations to continue. We've addressed the mitigation of risk that was an immediate nature, and now we can continue doing the investigation. So between 1982 and 1986, investigations at the site continued to assess where the contamination was and what media it was. And in 1986, EPA selected a remedy, and that remedy required the soils in the leach fields, the soils in extraneous soil piles, the soils that were contaminated where waste were disposed of on the ground to be treated along with shallow groundwater and pump and treat of the deeper bedrock groundwater. From 1995 to 2003, the Cannon Site Group performs the remedial design and the remedial investigations. So Cannon Site Group, that is a collective group of parties that were deemed liable in the sense that they contributed contamination, they contributed their waste to Cannons, and ultimately, through not their own doings, but ultimately those wastes ended up in these facilities. So they are considered potentially responsible parties, and they signed a consent decree which agreed to perform the cleanup and finance the cleanup at the site. So they performed the soils and groundwater cleanup from 1995 to 2003, and at that point, EPA, at their request, modified the groundwater portion of the remedy to monitor attenuation. What that means is you have chlorinated solvents, they eventually will break down into smaller components that then are less toxic, and so you let natural attenuation reduce it down to drinking water quality. In 2008, EPA and the state first required sampling for a new contaminant, emerging contaminant called 1,4-dioxane. This is a chemical that we understood to be associated with 1,1,1-trichloroethane, which was found in groundwater at the site. It's associated with many chlorinated solvents. It's a stabilizer. It's also found in many household products and extraneous materials. So initial sampling indicated that this was found in the source area and in groundwater at the site. In 2009, the Cannon Site Group sampled households on Ross Drive and for 1,4-dioxane, and all results came back non-detect. So as I said, the remedy had been converted to monitoring natural attenuation, and the Cannon Site Group has been performing that monitoring since 2003, and they are currently still performing that monitoring of groundwater at the site to assess remedy attainment down to drinking water quality. In 2014, EPA asked them to perform additional investigations. Many of the wells at the site were installed back in the 1980s. Technology had changed. Many of these wells are just open boreholes, as we call them, open holes down several hundred feet. And the scientific knowledge was that groundwater contaminants and groundwater itself was moving through fractures. So we asked them to come back and use new technology so they could look at individual fractures within the bedrock so we can understand what concentration would be in which fracture, so we could follow where the contaminants were and where they're going to be needing to be meet drinking water quality. So those actions started in 2014. In the same year, we were informed by the New Hampshire DES under a separate investigation that there were 5 households on Boston and Charleston that had contamination in their water supply wells that were similar to the site contaminations. We performed a couple years worth of investigation on those materials, and in 2016, EPA modified the remedy, requiring that those 5 houses be connected to the water line, which existed at the time, and that the Cannon Site Group perform additional supplemental investigations. And those investigations would look at the residual contamination that might be at the site, migration pathways, and whether or not there were additional receptors to this migration at the site. So those are the investigations we are currently working under. So those investigations, so again, so most of the investigations to date have been focused on the VOCs up in the source area, the chlorinated solvents. 1,4-dioxane and PFAS act a little differently than chlorinated solvents. 1,4-dioxane is a miscible compound. It wants to move fast. So investigations had to account for that. And PFAS, which is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which is a large group of chemicals, thousands of chemicals. We actually don't look for all the chemicals. We look for a subset of them that have toxicological data. So the investigations have been going, looking at PFAS and 1,4-dioxane in bedrock groundwater at the site. At the same time, the state of New Hampshire, while this is ongoing, establishes cleanup levels, drinking water standards for PFAS, in groundwater at the site, as well as lowers the 1,4-dioxane. So EPA had originally established a cleanup level of groundwater for 3 micrograms per liter for 1,4-dioxane, and it gets lowered during these investigations to 0.32. In 2018, and I'm trying to read it from this. So the other thing that started in 2018, so as the investigation started, one of the first things we did, we said we hadn't had a lot of data in the residential property. The first thing that happens is we look at the water supply data, and we got a great response, or they got a great response from the residents in these neighborhoods for allowing us to collect this data. I will say we have a substantial amount of data, and that was due to tremendous participation, and that was super helpful for us to understand what's going on in this area. So what happened is the first round of data came in. 1,4-dioxane is found in water supply wells. A few samples later, we're finding PFAS in the water supply wells. The state is lowering their concentrations, so what may have not seemed impacted at one might be later impacted just because the concentrations are lowering. Now, consistent with the state of New Hampshire regulations and a groundwater management permit with which they were sampling under, if a contamination is found in a water supply well above a drinking water standard, you are required to provide bottled water. So starting in 2018, any house that was deemed to have exceedances of a drinking water. You can come in.
Come on in.
Come on in.
That's okay. No, you're good. Don't worry. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't sit up here, though.
Yeah.
Anyone back.
Take some of the heat for you.
Yeah. So starting in 2018 and through continuous things, as a house would come back with data that exceeded any drinking water standard at the time, those houses would be offered bottled water. And Aaron alluded to that in the beginning. So over time, we've increased the number of houses that are being offered bottled water. In 2024, EPA determines that PFOA and PFOS are hazardous substances, and that allows us to move forward under CERCLA and Superfund to assess them as part of the site. At the same time, the federal government establishes drinking water standards, which were a little bit lower than the state of New Hampshire standards, for PFOA and PFOS, and they updated the toxicological data for these compounds. So that all happened. I think the toxicological data happened in November 2024. So at this point, EPA has moved forward and determined that we have enough information. We've received extreme set of residential data, and we have enough information to move forward with this component of it. We don't have all the data to clean up the site. We don't have all the data to even assess how or if we need to clean up the site. But we have enough information from the residential impacts that we can move forward on what we call an interim action. So this will become part of the final action, but right now we can look at it. An interim action looks at one exposure and one media. So we are looking at ingestion of contaminated groundwater as this interim action. So that's why Aaron says this is the focus of this. In July 2025, we are here. We've determined that groundwater used as drinking water, downgrading of the site in these neighborhoods presents an unacceptable risk, which I'll discuss in a minute, and we issue the proposed plan proposing this alternative action. And I'm going to pass it on to Jim, who's going to discuss a little bit about the supporting information for those findings.
Great, thanks, Cheryl. This one, right?
Yeah, well, you can push this too.
Oh, awesome.
Wait a minute,
You pushed
I
it.
hit it.
All right, so thank you. So I'm going to discuss the site conceptual model that we've developed for the site. And what we mean by site conceptual model is our understanding of the geology of the site, the contaminants that are at the site, and how those contaminants move through the environment. So this is a site plan showing the site. It's got a little more detail than the one Cheryl showed initially. So let's see. Oops, here we go. So this is the Tinkham Garage source area that Cheryl mentioned earlier. This is where the Home Depot is over here. This is the condo source area, again, which she mentioned. And again, the area up in here is where John Tinkham dumped his and washed out his trucks into these trenches and also discharged them to the ground surface that then got into the surface water, which flows down through the neighborhood. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is the condo area where Cheryl mentioned he disposed of waste into septic systems for the different condos that are kind of scattered around in this area. And also there was a feature here called the solvent swale, which was a small stream where wastes were dumped and migrated down gradient in this, again, via the surface water. So those are the source areas. A couple things I want to point out, as Cheryl mentioned earlier, this is a large site. It's about 375 acres, so much bigger than most of the sites that we deal with on a regular basis. So again, as Cheryl mentioned, the remedial investigations initially began in the early 1980s after the site was first discovered. And those initial investigations focused on the VOCs, as she mentioned. And by remedial investigations, the technologies that were used, for the most part, were sampling the various media at the site. And that included installing monitoring wells in both overburden, or the soil, and the underlying bedrock, as Cheryl mentioned earlier. In addition to that, they sampled drinking water from various residents around the facility, surface water samples, soil samples, collected sediment from the surface water bodies, and also indoor air. And in total, over 100 monitoring wells have been installed and sampled over the years at this site, and over 100 different residential properties have been sampled over the years. So extensive amount of work has been put into this site already. There's still some work to be done to fine-tune some of our understandings. There's still some areas what we call data gaps where we're not exactly sure what's going on in those areas. And that's where the future work will be focused in targeting and filling those data gaps. But again, a tremendous amount of work has already been done to help us develop this. EPA has put together a remedial investigation summary memorandum, and what that document does is summarize all of the previous remedial investigations that have been done, and including the more recent work that's been done, and summarize that all in one document. And that document is on the website, as Aaron mentioned. It's on the town website. It's available on the EPA website. I think it's on One Stop, too, at the state. So there's several ways that you guys can get that if you want to take a deeper dive into the conceptual model and get a better understanding of that in developing your any comments that you want to have on the proposed plan. So, as I mentioned earlier, the surface drainage was one of the first pathways that was of concern. And again, that material was disposed by Mr. Tinkham behind the facility, got into these surface water bodies, and these arrows kind of show the directions of the surface water. So this was a big concern initially, and as Cheryl had indicated, this is how the site was originally discovered. The stream kind of went directly from his facility down through the neighborhood and caused issues in the neighborhood that the residents complained about to the state, and that started this whole process. Since the remedial efforts that were taking place in the source area to address the oil and oops, I'm not sure why that happened.
Now I'm playing.
That button's touchy.
Yeah, it is.
Since that work was done, that remediation that took place in the source area where they dug up the soil that had the oil in it and removed that, They did different active remedial technologies to treat the soil and to treat the groundwater up in the source area. These surface water bodies have, for the most part, improved dramatically. We don't see a lot of dissolved contamination in these surface water bodies anymore. But historically, they were an important pathway. And as you all know, if you live in that neighborhood, it's a very wet area. There's a lot of streams that flow through the area, and those streams, when you get a heavy rainfall, they'll flood, and you get a lot of ponded water even in the neighborhood. But the big concern, I'm afraid to touch anything now, gun shy. The big concern right now is groundwater, because we do still have contamination in groundwater. And so what this figure shows is our current understanding of what we think is going on in the groundwater. So as I mentioned, what we've got for geology is we've got soil overlying bedrock. And as Cheryl mentioned, the soil layer is fairly thin at the site. We don't see a lot of extensive migration or long-distance migration of contamination in the soil groundwater. It's mostly in the bedrock groundwater, the deeper groundwater. And that's where the residential properties that surround this facility, that's where they get the water, from wells that are in the bedrock. So that's why it's of primary concern. And so through again, a lot of work that's been done at the site, including monitoring wells, a lot of surface geophysics, downhole geophysics, where we use sensing tools to try and identify where these pathways are that the contamination can move through. As Cheryl mentioned, groundwater flow in bedrock is through cracks in the rock, right? Rock is pretty solid. So the only way it can move through that is through these cracks. And so knowing where these cracks are, what the orientation of the cracks are, that drives where the contamination can go. So that's what we have to understand. And there's, like I said, various techniques that we can use to try and identify those. It's not an exact science. We do the best we can. We try and get the best understanding that we can. We use multiple lines of evidence, but to develop what our understanding is, and that's what this is. And the cracks in the rock, or the fractures in the rock, they're not all created equal. They're not all the same. You can think of it as kind of like a network of roads, right? You have small residential roads, you have cul-de-sacs, you have dead ends, smaller, which just, we don't get a lot of traffic on them, and the traffic moves slow. And then you've got your state highways, which are a little bit bigger. You get more traffic on those, and traffic goes faster. So those are like the kind of the mid fractures, where the fractures are bigger, they're longer. You get more water can flow through them. And then you've got the super highways, right? You've got the I-93, where you've got these big pathways where you get a lot of flow, and they can go for long distances. So what we have to do is try and put together that network and understand what that network is and how those roads are interconnected, and how, starting at the Tinkham Garage site, where we know the contamination was released to the ground surface, how that got into that network of fractures, how that got into that pathway of roads, and then trace it down through those roads and see where it's going to come out. And that's been kind of the focus of the initial RI, was to figure out where this contamination is going and where the receptors are, because that's our primary concern, is to identify, is there anybody that's at immediate risk? And because once someone's at immediate risk, that's what we need to identify and mitigate as soon as possible. And as Cheryl had indicated, early on, one of the first things we determined was that the people in the condos and the people on Mercury and McAllister were impacted. These pathways went through those neighborhoods, and the VOC contamination, which is what we knew about at that time, back in the 80s, was going that way. So that water line was immediately extended to those areas. Then, as the investigations progressed, and as science understood and learned about these new contaminants, the 1,4-dioxane in 2008, and then PFAS more recently in 2018, as we discovered these contaminants that are in the environment, we found out they're toxic. We started studying those and sampling those at the site, and so that's kind of where we are now, is we're figuring out where did those go, how did those migrate through. And as Cheryl mentioned, and she'll talk about this more later, they move slightly differently, or they move differently, not even slightly differently. They move differently through the fractured bedrock than do the VOCs. So we have to kind of reassess these pathways. But so what you're looking at here are two different sets of arrows. And these, again, based on a lot of information that studies that we've done at the site, but these are the primary pathways that we believe the groundwater is moving through the bedrock. The blue arrows represent more or less natural pathways, so they flow under natural flow. Groundwater at the site wants to go to Beaver Brook, which is the surface water body here. It's a stream that goes down this way. There's a big wetland area down here where a couple streams all come together. And this wetland area and Beaver Brook are where all the groundwater wants to go. That's where it wants to flow to that and then flow off to the south. So these are the natural pathways. But you've also got these green pathways. And what the green pathways are enhanced flow direction based on pumping. So you've got the natural flow direction, but now if you put in a residential neighborhood, say, for example, up here in Boston, Charleston, and you put in a bunch of wells and everybody starts using those wells and pumping those wells for their daily use, you can actually pull contamination and pull groundwater into that area that wouldn't naturally go in that direction. So it's what we call pumping induced migration. And so that's what these green arrows represent areas that we believe the groundwater was pulled and the contaminants were pulled based on pumping in those areas. So the Boston Charleston neighborhood over here pulled some contamination from the southern end of the Tinkham Garage site up in this direction, and also pulled it down in this direction towards the pumping wells for the condo area. We also believe that is going on within the Ross Tokenol neighborhood as well. That you've got the pumping in here is pulling contamination. Although we show the arrow kind of more going from north to south, there's actually kind of flow back and forth because you've got a lot of wells in that area. So that's our conceptual model for the site. So this is a map of the extent of the 1,4-dioxane contamination. Now, this is it's kind of a hybrid map. We took data from actually it's longer than that, right? It's like almost a 9-10 year period.
Yeah.
And we averaged, and we took the maximum concentration that was detected at each location over that 10-year period to develop this map. And just to kind of show us the maximum footprint of what this 1,4-D, or what we call 1,4-D, 1,4-dioxane, what the extent of this looked like. And so you can see you've got high concentrations here, the red, in the Tinkham Garage source area. You've got some higher concentrations down here in the condo area where the disposals were. And you can see how it got pulled up into the, oops, sorry, thank you.
You can show them too where the LGSW was, the former pumping.
Oh, yep, yeah. So it got pulled up into the Albany, Boston Charleston Albany neighborhood via that kind of induced pumping pathway that we talked about. You can see the natural pathways also. This is kind of was the main. If I go back, that's this arrow, right? This main natural flow right through the neighborhood. This is the one we talked about, the pumping induced one. Oops, man, that thing is touchy. There's a well here, which is the water supply well for the condo area, which is located here, and that actually pulled the contamination from the Tinkham Garage source area down in this direction. That was that other green arrow, that other pumping induced arrow that I had shown before. You see some locations here where we see lower concentrations, but along this pathway. So this pathway is, again, it's a natural pathway, we believe. It may also, this one's kind of on the border. It may also be pumic enhanced as well. But it's, to obviously a much less extent than what we see going up into the Boston Charleston neighborhood. This is a map, similar situation for PFOA, so one of the PFAS compounds. This is the more common PFAS compound that's detected at the site. The other one is PFOS, and that compound shows a pretty similar distribution as this. But we're just going to show this one for today. But so again, similar situation where you've got higher concentrations up in the two source areas, the condo area, the Tinkham Garage source area, And then you've got the pathway going in this direction, the main pathway that's going down here. We've got kind of a gap in here, you'll see, where they don't connect as they did with the 1,4-D. And that's one of the data gaps that I talked about before. As you can see, there's not a lot of monitoring. I should use this thing. There's not a lot of monitoring wells in there, so that's going to be a focus for our ongoing investigations that are upcoming to try and fill in that gap a little bit. And then also, again, up in the Boston-Charleston neighborhood. So similar pattern to what we see with the 1,4-dioxane. So the monitoring that is being done at the site, it's a fairly complex program. It's run by the state of New Hampshire Department of Environmental Service, New Hampshire DES, runs that monitoring program under what's called a groundwater management permit. And I just want to show this figure briefly. The areas in blue are areas that are connected to water lines already. You can see all the different monitoring wells, and the different colors that are on the monitoring wells denote the different frequency of sampling. Some wells are sampled twice a year, some wells are sampled once a year. And then you can see the residential neighborhood. You can see the high density of sampling that's being conducted in the Ross-Tokenol neighborhood, and also up in the Boston-Charleston neighborhood as well. Afraid to touch anything. One of the questions we get a lot from the residents is, hey, my neighbor's well is contaminated, but my well is not. Or my well is very low, but my neighbor's well is very high. My neighbor's getting bottled water, but I'm not. Why is that? How can that be? And so what it is, again, as we talked about, groundwater flow in bedrock is in these cracks. And this is actually a picture of a well where we pump the well down, and we pump the water level down, and this is the water coming out of the cracks into the well. And it just kind of just shoots out of these cracks into the well. So it really all depends, on which cracks your well intercepts versus your neighbor. And like I said, some of these cracks are again, if you think of it as a system of roads, right? Some of these cracks are dead ends. Some of these cracks are, like Route 104. And then some of these cracks are bigger, and they connect multiple wells. So it all depends on which crack in the rock your particular well happens to intersect in your well. And some of those cracks are contaminated, some of them aren't. Like the green, what this is meant to denote green here, like this would be clean water. But this fracture, being the red, it's got contamination in it. So if you're in this well, you're getting a mix of this red water, which is contaminated, and also some water that's clean from this deeper fracture. So again, it's really dependent on which particular fractures you happen to have intersect your particular well. And that's why it can be so variable in a neighborhood, even though the wells are the same depth.
And I'll just add one thing to Jim too, is that this exact scenario is what adds the complexity to the investigation. As you can imagine, you put one well in one spot, you could maybe get no water or not detect anything, but you move it 4 feet to the right, and it's a totally different situation. So people wonder, why is there so much investigation? And it's just because of the complexity of the bedrock fractures and finding it. So
Right.
it describes it.
I was just saying, and then the other part is some of the residential wells, at the site, some of the residential wells are tens of feet, and I think the maximum depth is 1,500 is the deepest residential well. So we do have a variation in wells. And that's more related to where it's installed. Typically, the state requires you to drill so that you have at least 5 liters per minute for your household use. So you need a reservoir, and you might have very fine fractures that doesn't produce a lot of water, or you might produce a lot of water, so your well can be more shallow.
And I think the other point, the takeaway here from this too is, by pumping your well, you can pull contamination in from a neighbor's property. So that's something to keep in mind as we move forward here, because as we know, the remedy that we're going to talk about, Cheryl's going to talk about, is a water line. So we're going to be connecting people to the water line. So if you connect, but your neighbor doesn't, your neighbor could pull your contamination onto their property, because now you're not using your well, but they are using their well. So just like that, in those induced pumping arrows that we talked about, we showed on the other figure, the green arrows that are induced pumping, that can happen on a smaller scale if you start connecting some people up to the water line, but not everybody. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Cheryl. I'm going to give you back the touchy little thing.
Thanks.
You're better at it than I am.
All right. So
Start you off.
there you go. All right. So now that we have, information from this remedial investigation and a lot of data from residential wells, we moved forward into an assessment of risk. We had enough data to move forward and just assess the what would be the risk. Now, there's risk just because there's a contaminated site doesn't mean there's a risk. You can have a lot of toxin over here, but if no one's touching it, if no one's exposed to it, it is not a risk. You have to have 3 different factors in order to have a risk. You need to have a contaminant at certain concentrations. You need to have contact or some form of exposure to that toxin, and that toxin has to have an effect. It has to have toxicological information. Not all chemicals are bad at every different concentration, so everyone has a different effect. So looking at those 3 factors, we are, because it's an interim remedy and we're looking just at one exposure, so we're looking at neighborhood water supply wells, and we know we have 1,4-dioxane, and we know we have PFAS compounds, primarily PFOA and PFOS, and I say primarily PFOA as in greater than 90% of the households detected PFOA. But there were other contaminants in the PFAS category that were detected at most at lower levels, but they do carry some toxicological data, so they were considered in this as part of the risk assessment. So what we end up doing is we take, and I'm going to try and use this little thing. So this is my thing. So we take each of those chemicals that we just talked about, and we get their toxicity values, because each of those chemicals will have its own toxicity value. And we assess the exposure route. So the only exposure route out of all of these potential exposure routes that we do consider at a site, the only one we're doing for this action is residential ingestion of, this says tap water, but in this case, it's groundwater used as tap water at each house. So that is the only exposure we assess for risk in this scenario. And when we say risk assessment, what we're saying is that we're looking to see if there's current exposure based on when you're drinking, potential future exposure, and it comes with a lot of other factors. So going into this calculation will be lifetime exposure, 70 years, 2 liters a day ingestion. There's multiple factors that go into how they compute the risk. It's not just the chemical and the toxicity. It's about an assessment. So all of those things bring us to a risk calculation. So in our case, we had greater than 90% detections of PFOA within the neighborhoods that we analyze. So, and one of the things, like Jim said, our data varied. So we can have a neighbor that has non-detects, we can have a neighbor with high levels right next door. In the same well, in the same residential well, depending on precipitation, we can have results that are extremely high, and then 6 months later, they're non-detect. Then they go back to extremely high. So what we're seeing is fluctuations in concentrations in residential wells based on precipitation and migration through the site and into the neighborhood. So because that makes it a little more complicated to do a risk assessment. What we did is we took the data from approximately 80 households. Now, again, not everybody agrees to sampling, but the majority do, so we appreciated that. So we took all of the data since 2018 for the data, and what they did is they put it into a program, and what it does is it develops an exposure point, which is an average concentration across the neighborhood. So you get an average concentration of a specific contaminant that if someone were to drink from the groundwater in the neighborhood, that would be the average concentration. And that computation took some very high concentrations and took a lot of non-detects. And then we used that concentration and we plugged it into the risk assessment. So risk is something that EPA does, and I just want to clarify, we all have a baseline risk. We all have a propensity to get cancer, 1 in 2 people, or, as they do it. So when EPA talks about risk generated from exposure to these chemicals, it's an incremental additional risk to your baseline. It's not considering your baseline. So when we look at it, what EPA considers is that we consider that the incremental risk that would fall somewhere between 1 in 1 million and 1 in 10,000 additional cases of cancer is in the acceptable range. You know, if the baseline is 1 and 2, this is adding a small portion that would then have incremental risk. For non-cancer risk, now again, not every chemical that you're exposed to has a cancer endpoint. Some have liver toxicity, some might have endocrine, some might have fetal development. There are other factors that we look at. We call them non-cancer risk. And when they target those, they look at the target endpoints, and when they give it a hazard index, and if that hazard index is 1 or less, we consider that to be acceptable, and greater is not. So what we're looking for is a calculation when we add up all the different chemicals that they're exposed to and what those incremental risks are. Are we within the risk range and we're okay, or are we out of the risk range? So taking all the numbers, using the average exposure concentration in groundwater for each chemical, the calculations for cancer and for non-cancer exceeded our acceptable numbers, and that's from the average concentrations. So EPA determined that ingestion of groundwater in these neighborhoods as drinking water source poses an unacceptable human health risk. And again, that's factored into a lifetime risk. So this is calculating it for children, 6 years of exposure for children. Obviously, their risks are higher, they're smaller. And then for adults, typically most risks at Superfund sites are triggered by children's exposure because they're smaller, because they tend to generate the highest risk. But having an unacceptable risk in these calculations allows EPA to form the basis for now taking an action to mitigate the risk to protect human health. So these are the steps we have to go through to get to the next phase, which is the focused feasibility study. So a focused feasibility study, again, it's focused. We're only looking at groundwater used as drinking water in this case. So what is a feasibility study? Well, it's an evaluation of options to protect human health through the mitigation of unacceptable risks from exposure, ingestion in this case, of site-related contaminants found in groundwater, which is currently being used as drinking water by residents. So what we do is we first develop objectives. What do we want these options to attain? And we selected 2 objectives. We want to pick options that prevent current and potential future exposure to the site contaminants in groundwater, including 1,4-dioxane and PFAS, the newer contaminants, from ingestion of groundwater from individual supply wells at levels that pose an unacceptable risk. We want to remove the risk. And we also, knowing what Jim has presented and the connection of all the wells and the fractures, we want to be able to reduce or minimize migration of contaminated groundwater from the site. We want to remove the stresses. And to do that, because right now we have 89 houses that are not connected to a water line in the neighborhood. So 89 houses are using water and pulling on those stresses. So that is part of one of our other objectives. So there's a couple screening steps in here that look at the different alternatives. 2 of the ones that got screened out typically had to do with, can we restore groundwater in the neighborhood? Can we get it to drinking water quality? And the answer to that is we don't have enough information. We don't have enough time. It takes a long time to extract contaminants from groundwater, to clean them up. We cannot do that readily. We cannot do that easily. As Aaron said, if you're trying to look at groundwater, we can have one fracture that's giving us less than a liter a minute, and the next fracture 5 feet away is giving us 50 gallons a minute. So it's a very difficult concept, and we're trying to continue to investigate that, but we could not do it fast enough to give you protected water at the site. So those answers were not going to be part of these options. So what we did look at is alternative water. The first one is no action. This is a requirement that we have to do. We have to put it in, and we compare the other actions to it. If we do nothing, is that okay? Are we safe if we do nothing? That's the first one we have to leave in there. No additional actions would be taken. The site would continue and would continue our investigations. The second option we looked at was bottled water. Now, again, we're already providing bottled water at the site to many of the residents. So this would be a provision of bottled water for all of the residents within the neighborhood. We consider bottled water to be a temporary action. And the reason for that is because because it's a temporary action, we're giving bottled water under the presumption that we would be able to restore groundwater so that you don't need bottled water. And again, as I said, that restoration of groundwater is an unknown right now. That's why it's considered a temporary action. We don't know. The cost estimate that we use, just so if people had a basis for it, and again, cost estimates are plus or minus, it's just an estimate. We took the 89 houses that are currently not connected to the water line, and the provision would be a monthly supply of water consistent with what is being provided now in the neighborhood, and that was costed out over 30 years. 30 years is the design life that we use at EPA. That's really what the costs are. Costs not included, but work that is included is currently EPA still performs 5-year reviews at the site where we look at the protectiveness of the remedy and we assess what else needs to be done at the site. That would continue because we're doing it anyway. And long-term monitoring, which the Cannons Group is currently performing, that would be performed anyway. They were required to do it under previous remedy decisions, and they will continue to do that. Whoops. It is touchy.
It is touchy.
So the third option is point of entry treatment systems. So again, we nickname them POETs. Essentially what these are treatment systems that are put inside your house so that when your pump pulls in groundwater, it's treated through a system. Typically it provides effective treatment, exposure. For the most part, 1,4-dioxane is pretty low levels in the neighborhood. PFAS is variable, but these would address, absorb, usually it's activated carbon, and filtration. It's going to remove the particles. It's going to address and remove 1,4-dioxane and PFAS so that the rest of the household would have treated water for use for drinking water and other supplies. Again, it's a treatment option. However, it's considered temporary because, again, it relies on the idea that you are restoring groundwater, and at some point, you would not need a POET. We've used POETs at many of our sites. We tend to use them for 5 or 10 years as an interim action. As a longer-term measure, it's a little more cumbersome because, again, we have to continue to monitor the well. We have to monitor the water going through the treatment system. We have to make sure what's coming out of the treatment system is clean and is of drinkable quality. So this requires years of O&M that would continue as long as that system was at the house. And again, the cost estimate, to be consistent, was the 89 houses that are currently not on the water line and 30 years of operation. The 5-year reviews that EPA would be done and the long-term monitoring, again, are part of it, but they add no cost because they're already required. The fourth option we looked at, which is our preferred option that's discussed in the proposed plan, is risk mitigation using water line extension and connections to the households. So this would require there's water lines in the area and nearby. We would extend the water line and connect the households in these 2 neighborhoods to the water line. The design and the installation would be coordinated with your local supplier. So Penachuk Corporation is the local water supplier. We would not be doing that. They would be doing it. They are the experts. And this is considered a permanent provision of alternative water. This is not reliant. It's a permanent option. It does not get removed. It does not rely on attainment of groundwater cleanup levels or drinking water standards in the neighborhood. It would stay there, and it will immediately mitigate risk to human health from the ingestion of the contaminated groundwater. And again, for cost purposes, it's an extension of the water line to 89 houses, continued with the 5-year review. So once we have developed options, we have to do a comparative analysis. And this lets us further screen which option we might select in the end. So what we have to do is we have to look at 9 different criteria. The first 2 criteria are called threshold criteria. We cannot select a remedy or an option if it is not protective and if it does not meet state or federal regulations. So the only one that does not meet protectiveness is no action. The rest are protective, can be protective, temporary or permanent, and would meet compliance with regulations. We have balancing criteria. We compare the alternatives for long-term effectiveness. It's easy to put the water line in, it's effective, your water turns on, you have water. Bottled water, people might get tired of it. It's more of a process to use for drinking water. The POET system, you have to maintain the filters, you have to maintain your testing. One of the criteria is reduction of toxicity, mobility, and volume through treatment. The only option that treats groundwater is the POET system as it's coming into your house. The rest do not treat. However, they are effective by, if the water line comes in and the wells are no longer pumping, it would reduce the stresses. So it would reduce the mobility of the contaminants into the neighborhood. The other ones we look at are short-term effectiveness, and implementability. So essentially what happens, what are the impacts? What are the short-term impacts? There's minor impacts for bottled water, its delivery. There's minor impacts for the POET system, its individual installed in basements. You have trucking and excavation for impacts for the water line. Implementability, all of these services are available and they're readily and easily implementable. And then we look at costs. And cost is more of a cost effectiveness. So there's no cost for no action. The 30 years of bottled water for the residents would be about $2.8 million. The cost for installing point of entry treatment systems and then maintaining them for 30 years would be about $8 million. And then the extension of the water line would be roughly $6.8 million, and the connections to the houses. So, as I said, the preferred alternative is the water line extension. This would be, as we said, we've extended the water line in 1983 at the site. We extended it in 2016. This option, as we'll show in a picture, or as Jim showed in the picture, this option, if you extend this water line, this extends to all of the houses. There's no more remaining houses. This would be the final extension of the water line surrounding the houses. Surrounding the households surrounding the site. So what the main components of it would be the extension of the water line into the neighborhoods to prevent exposure and provide a permanent alternative water source for residents currently relying on groundwater as a drinking water source. And again, we mentioned what the target neighborhoods were. This option requires that we request disconnection of your private water supply wells. So typically when we come out and we're putting in an alternative water supply as a water line, we don't want people pumping. So they're going to request access to get to your property so that we can not have incidental exposures in the future of someone trying to use that well to drink, or to use that well that's now going to induce further stresses on the aquifer. And again, these are things we will need residents' permission. So one of the options that we have is there's a lot of households in this neighborhood. And again, as we said, some have higher concentrations than others, some are deeper. One of the options we've discussed with the Cannons Group is that, rather than installing wells, which takes a lot of time, it would be great if we could take the data we have and maybe select some of the residential wells, and if the resident allows it, convert them to monitoring wells. Long-term monitoring is going to happen for a very long time, and it would be great if we could convert some of the drinking water wells into monitoring wells at the site, because long-term monitoring will continue to monitor the progress and effectiveness of the remedial actions. And again, progress, 5-year reviews would continue, as with long-term monitoring. I just put another point in here that says, so right now we have 66 houses that are being provided bottled water. Because installation of the water line and all the connections could take anywhere up to 2 to 3 years, depending on how the operation does, the provision of bottled water would continue. So if you're on bottled water currently, you would continue to get bottled water until you have a connection. That wouldn't stop. And to get into more details, if I can, Jim. All right, so this has a lot more details, but I'm gonna take my glasses off because it's easier. But this is all in the proposed plan. Just wanted to hit on some highlights. So essentially, the estimated length of the water line is about 8,300 linear feet. Again, it's designed and coordinated for work with the local water provider, Penachuk Corporation, and there's usually local plumbers that are used to do the household connections. Could span 2 to 3 years, depending on construction and operation. The water line extension consists of road opening, trenching to depths below the frost line, installation of the water line, and testing, as well as backfill and road restoration. In areas of Ross Drive specifically, the bedrock is very shallow under the road, so there may need to be removal of bedrock to do the well installation. So we've identified that and added costs in to support that. Upon the completion of the water line, mitigation of risk would be immediate. So the connection, so the water line would come in, it would be installed, and there would be a curb stop, so the water line would connect to each person's curb. At that point, there would need to be individual plans with each resident. So all of your houses are different, your driveways are different, so the pathway for how it would go from the curb stop to your house is going to be different. So each resident would need to have an individual plan for how that connection would go and how that restoration would go. So basically,
you'll get to know me real well during that time.
Oh, yeah, or the Cannon Site Group.
Yeah.
So, and to do this and to get on the property, we can get access through the town to work in the roadway and the right-of-ways. However, we would be requiring, as part of this process, there would need to be access agreements signed with each resident in order to perform the work. The cost of the water line extension are estimated at $6.8 million. That's roughly $3 million for the water line extension and roughly $3 million for the connections to each of the households. So at this point, that part is part of the Superfund remedy. So that will be borne by the parties that are responsible for the site, whether it be the Cannon Site Group, EPA, however we're doing. Obviously, EPA is going to ask the Cannon Site Group to perform this as they've been performing the rest of the remedial actions at the site. But those are the parts that are being borne by the Superfund process. EPA policy is that once you are connected and water is flowing into your house, you are responsible for the payment of your water. So at that point, you would have an account with Pennachuck, and you would pay, there would be a meter at your house, and you would pay for the meter services and the water that is supplied to your house. So Renee was able to get some information from Pennachuck just recently on what that average would be. And so what Pennachuck Corporation has indicated to us is that the average cost per month for each household would be about $60. This is an average cost per month over 5 years, noting that the cost in the summer are obviously going to be higher than the cost in the winter, and that really is going to be dependent on each person's house. If you have 5 kids that like to take lots of showers like mine does, you might have a little bit higher water bill like I do. But that is how the responsibility would do. Everything is paid for up to the connection. Once it's connected, you are responsible as residents for your water use.
Cheryl, can I just add one
Yep,
thing?
absolutely.
When I spoke with Pennachuck, they did offer some additional resources. So if anybody has specific questions, you guys can come see me. Just very quickly, if you go to the Pennachuck Water website. If you go to the Pennachuck Water website, if you want more details, as Cheryl said, what she's described is sort of an average, a typical scenario, and it can fluctuate either throughout a given year or at a different resident. If you have specific questions, there's additional information available. You can go to the Pennachuck website, and on the upper left-hand corner, they have a button where you can, it says My Water System, and you can go in there and get additional information. But if anybody wants more, just reach out and let me know. But I did have some conversations with them because I imagine that's a question on the minds.
So this is a map depicting the water line extension. So let's see if I can do this. So in blue here are existing water lines. So again, we have the 1983 water line extension where it goes down Route 2. There's actually water line extensions because the development of Nevins required water line. There's water line coming down Gilchrist Road, and there was earlier extensions into Charleston. EPA's extension is down this end. So everything pink is the new extension of the water line into the neighborhood. These red areas, which I can't make out from this distance, but I know they're there on Ross Drive. Those are the areas where we understand that bedrock might be shallower and might require some additional work in those areas for the water line extension. So why is this the preferred remedy? Well, when we looked at the 9 criteria, and again, the last 2 criteria, one is the state, and the state has offered their support for the water line connections as the preferred option. And the final criteria, the final one we have, is public opinion. So this is why we're here. We're trying to get you to understand what it is we're proposing. Hope you understand it enough that if you have a comment that you want to offer, you can add it to the comment period and give it that. But yours is the final criteria that we need to hear from. We want to hear from you, and that way we can factor that in. You know, we've heard one comment from the town already. Just to give it out, you know, the question was, you know, the water line design, can it include fire hydrants? Can it, you know, is that a consideration? And that could be a consideration for it. So that might be a comment we get from the town. You know, if that was something to consider, you know, EPA would put the remedy would be the water line. If there's a betterment, as we call it, then we could do it, you know, at the same time, because that would be the right time to do it. But they couldn't pay for it. Because that would be a betterment. But it might be something that might be considered at the same time as being appropriate. So again, we think the water line extension provides the highest level of protection and long-term effectiveness. It provides a permanent alternative water source. It utilizes a nearby connection. We don't have to extend this for 2 miles to get to the water line, which we do on some sites. It meets all of the regulations for the state and the federal government for action and location specific regulations. We believe that the shutting off of the significant amount of wells in the neighborhoods would reduce stresses on the aquifer. What we're hoping, it was reduce plume mobility and volume, even though it does not satisfy treatment. We do not see there's any significant implementability issues because construction services are available. Pennachuck is, I think, well-known also in your town. And we think it's a cost-effective way of mitigating both the current and potential future exposure to groundwater as drinking water, where the existing groundwater source is considered to present an unacceptable risk for ingestion. So that is why we have come forward and we have proposed.
I'm just going to go back to, because I did just notice something in their proposed plan, which there's copies in the back. You'll see on this map where Albany, that road is, there's no water line extension, but that is a part of the extension. It's on the proposed plan figure, but it's not on this one. I just noticed that. But
Did I get the wrong one?
I just want to say that before we kept going, in case somebody was like,
Oh,
I'm there, and I don't see that there. But before I even get to this part, I know we went a little bit over than I had said we were going to. So, and I can save this for the very end. I'm going to open up to questions now. So I think you might have to walk to the front and stand at the mic, but you can go ahead first.
Shocked because I'm usually being told I'm too loud.
It's only for TV. That's all.
Decorum, behavior that is controlled, calm, and polite. I am going to do my best. The main question that I had, because I got it, like you need the property owner's consent to come on and do all the shebang. I have 2 questions, really.
Sure.
The first question is, does agreement to install the new water supply with Pennachuck require the removal of our well? Has that already been figured out, and does one require the other?
So that's typically in the X.
So
Yeah.
So no, it does not have to be. That is
I understand.
that is usually what it is if we have a PRP and we ask them to do it, and I've done this at many sites, that is part of the access agreement. Because they need to know. Because in the end, you got to remember, these parties are on the hook. They're on the hook for restoring groundwater. They're on the hook for as far as it goes. So obviously, if you have more people pulling this, their responsibilities could get bigger and bigger.
Right.
And that's probably not what they want, or anybody. So the idea is that you're working with a party that's willing to come and pay for this. Obviously, it's part of the cleanup. But that would be the reason why, is because they're trying to minimize it. We did try. In 2016, we had the same question. And what I did is I asked the 5 residents if they would not use their irrigation wells, because that's what they wanted it for the lawns. And they, right.
That's pretty much what we're talking
Right,
about, right?
right,
Exactly.
right, I know.
Prices are going to go up in the summer. Why? Because you're watering your lawn.
Right, right. So here's what I'll tell you. I know. So they agreed not to use their things. And what we saw was a dramatic decrease in VOC concentration. So not pulling it definitely, allowed the site to recover. I'm going to point out another one. So on the other side of the condos, groundwater has migrated from one of the leach fields into another neighborhood. Now they're not drinking the groundwater, but one of the residents has an irrigation well. We put a well also in his property about 150 feet apart, so a brand new well, and we went down and we got some low concentrations. But he has a very big yard, he had been using his irrigation wells. He has some of the highest levels because he drew all the contaminants to that well.
Okay.
So that's kind of your 2-part answer.
Okay. But that was only my one question.
Okay, that's your
One of
first
2.
question.
The second question is somewhat humorous, but I'm still going to ask it. And let's face it, Pennachuck is the big winner here, because they got 100 new customers and they can pretty much charge whatever the hell they want as a result of this recommended action. Do they already have a statue being made of Tinkham? And where is it going to be positioned so we can chuck stuff at it?
I can write that down.
I would really like it, because I bought my house in 2013. I didn't know boo skiddly about any of this stuff until I got a call from Haley and Aldridge saying, hey, we need to come test your well, and we're going to give you some Monadnock water. What? And then I found out about all this. So, like I said, Pennachuck, kind of evil, big benefit here.
Yep.
Thank you.
I will say, and to that point is that, well, like we were talking about the different alternatives. Right now, the water line is the EPA's preferred alternative, but there are those criteria, and community acceptance is one of those criteria. So your comment about using your well after the water line would be a great comment to put in the public comment here, which we'll talk about. So I'm glad we were able to have that dialogue and exchange, but when the time tomorrow, for the next 30 days, if it seems like a lot of people have that concern, that's a good comment to bring up, to put in that, the summary that goes with the ultimate, we call it a record of decision, but basically is memorializes the plan for the site. So,
Yeah, but now you're just contaminating the ground.
Well, right, yeah,
Yeah, it becomes a circle, a closed loop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you get runoff.
yeah, and that's yeah, yeah, and that's the second point too. Is yeah.
I think the other thing to consider, keep in mind too, is that absolutely, you're going to get a water bill that you didn't have before, but on the other hand, something to keep in mind is that your electric bill is going to go way down, because those well pumps suck a lot of electricity, and especially when you're irrigating your lawn, you're running that pump for, I don't know about you, but I have to water my lawn for like 2 hours every morning. You're running that pump for 2 hours, and so there's that. There will be an electricity savings. But also, you don't think about this, but if your well fails, like if we have a drought, and the last couple of years we've had droughts with this, this global warming thing, whether you believe in that or not, the fact is we are getting more droughts, and if your well, runs dry, you don't have to worry about that with if you have Pennachuck water. You're also, they're doing testing. They're required to test it. So you're on a regular basis. So you know that your water is always being tested, and if anything comes up in the future, they have to treat it. You don't have a well anymore. And also, the well pumps fail. I had a lightning strike near my house, and it didn't even hit my well. It just hit nearby, and it fried the pump. And I had to, have a driller come out, pull the pump out, put a new pump in. That cost me, $6,000. So, there are costs that, and you could live in your house for 30 years and never have a problem with your well. And so, there's that too, but.
Right. I'll add one more thing. I appreciate that you said do the water line and then ask for the well. We do have, we've got multiple Superfund sites, and, we have cases where people have refused outright. So we've put a curb stop to their house, and then if they refuse to connect to the water line, we then ask, can we continue to sample? We don't have 100% of people to sample. Some people absolutely don't want to have samples. From what we've seen, groundwater is contaminated. And if you have a lot of irrigation wells, you likely are pulling something to your house. And groundwater is coming. It's not your groundwater, it's groundwater that's picking up everything and moving through the neighborhoods. It's collecting as it goes. So it's collecting from whatever goes into the surface waters, it's collecting from the site, it's collecting from whatever goes into septic and leach fields in the neighborhood. So we would come back if somebody said they weren't going to do it or they weren't sure. We would then continue to monitor. We would ask them because we would want to know, because in the end we're supposed to be protective of human health, and so we would continue to offer.
I think one of the biggest issues, me coming in here, sorry to speak again, folks, I'm just that kind of person, is there would be an exorbitant cost to the residents per home. We see $6,800 thinking we're coming in here, we're going to have to drop $6,800, and that would be like a hard no. I think a lot of the concern was, what is each household going to have to pay as a result of this? And I think that what I'm getting of it is nothing until we're hooked up to Pennachuck, and then we pay whatever the hell.
Then you pay the water.
Right, $60 a month, yeah.
Right.
And I will say in other sites, because EPA has remedy for water lines happen at other sites. And another situation I've run to in a site in Rhode Island is that there was, a water line that was chosen as the remedy, and ultimately that person that lived there had denied it, and then come back 15 years later, a new homeowner is like, wait, why did I? And the thing about that is, it's important to do this now because, we have the evidence. We're in the one right now. In the future, it's more difficult to go back and do that. So it's important that was a situation that I just ran into that, maybe you personally, it's may not seem an issue because you're like, I'm going to live in this house for the next, 30 years or so. But we have had issues in time where we've had to go back and someone's like, I bought this house and I thought, I don't know. I didn't know why I'm not on the water line. Now here we are. So that's just another, I guess, reason as well, that situation we've run into.
And eventually, I'll add one more piece where maybe you can speak to, this, because it's a state requirement. So eventually, we have this thing where the state of New Hampshire, because we do restrictions on the use of groundwater, or we put notices, the state of New Hampshire could expand and put a notice on the groundwater, which would then run with each deed that says this water is contaminated.
Yeah, that's a common part of the GMP, the Groundwater Management Permit Monitoring Program.
What is the timeline to get the water?
Okay, so first I need comments. Yeah, so we're gonna get the comments and then we're gonna finalize this decision. I have to do it in a final, it's called a record of decision, and that has to be done by September 30th. And then the procedure would be is that we would issue a notice to the responsible parties, the ones that are currently cleaning up the site, invite them in to discuss and negotiate how this would be implemented. In 2016, there was no negotiations. It pretty much went through. They coordinate with Pennachuck, and that was a pretty quick deal. What takes a long time isn't so much the design for a water line extension. That's pretty standard. It's the individual plans that then they have to go through. That usually takes the longest amount of time to talk to. So depending on how long, depending if they move through the negotiations quickly, if we, move forward into design, that's why we kind of said 2 to 3 years, is because those things I don't have a factor on.
So it's 2 to 3 years?
It could be. We just wanted to manage expectations, just in case those go. So, but you can speak to that when they're connected.
Again, though, that's another good
So they come in and
that's another
as
good
soon as
comment to
they're
have
connected,
starting the
post it
comment
out.
period tomorrow if you want to ask that question as well.
I have a question, but I think I know the answer to it. My question is, why Pennachuck when we have two other choices, Manchester Water and Derry Water? Pennachuck is the most expensive. Why?
It's within Pennachuck's franchise.
Right.
Yeah.
Explain that.
It's within Pennachuck's franchise. So what it is the public utilities, and I don't know right to the details of it, but there's certain parts of the town that are under certain utilities domain. The north end of town is under Manchester Waterworks franchise.
Right.
The area east of Exit 4, that's in the town of Derry's franchise. Pennachuck, Tocono, Ross, and Boston and Albany, that's within Pennachuck's franchise.
I understand. I guess I just feel bad because they are the most expensive, and it's sad that the people didn't get a choice to who they wanted. That's all.
One bit of information I had learned speaking with Pennachuck Water recently about this issue. She did point out the fact that they had merged. There was a subsidiary, and John, you may know better, but a recent merger this past spring, within the Pennachuck Corporation domain did actually result in decreased rates within Londonderry, for what it's worth.
No, it didn't.
So if you're speaking with folks who may have be basing their information on something that's a little bit older than that, surprisingly, rates reportedly had been decreased this spring
where I
a
live.
bit.
Well, I have several questions. Number one, who set up that franchise? How was that franchise set up? I live in the Nevins, so I have a couple of questions that's coming up with that. But who set up that franchise?
No idea, Christine.
Okay, thank you. I live in the Nevins. We have multiple wells that have been dug, or test sites that have been dug recently. But yet, even though that is the highest concentration of people, there's over 200 people in that area. It's the smallest amount of testing that you're doing, and I don't quite understand why that's happening, okay? That's one of my questions. The other question is, there are multiple studies that have come out and having been an intensive care nurse for 42 years, these chemicals go through the largest organ in our body, which is your skin, is the largest organ. And all the recent studies that have come out have said that yes, the PFAS and PFOS are absorbed through your skin. Now, it can be through the water. It can be through some makeups that have PFAS in them. Why do your cancer rates not include the largest organ in your body receiving those PFAS? Because it's not just the water these people are drinking. It's the showers they're taking, the clothes that they're putting on their body that are washed in PFAS, that have PFAS in them, that are up against your skin, that are increasing your chances of cancer far beyond what you're showing in that. So you agree, you know that.
Right.
You know that. So I don't understand why. And as far as wanting to water your lawn, well, just make sure your grandchildren don't eat the grass, because
Or run
they'll
through
be
the sprinkler.
ingesting it. Huh?
Or run through the sprinkler.
Or run through the sprinkler. Okay? So that's a concern of mine, that, you know, people need to be aware that. And I want to know why the Nevins, we don't have the testing, because we couldn't have basements in the original Nevins.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, when Massetti came in, we were allowed to have basements.
Yeah.
And that soil, that opened up all those chemicals that came up through the ground into our homes.
All right.
So,
So I'm gonna stop you there so I can just address some of these questions. Not because I want you to stop, but I just want to get some.
Before we forget 'em.
Yeah, before I forget them. I write fast.
We do
but-
one at a time.
I'll
all
get
right,
used to it.
so-
I'm always up here with questions.
That's okay.
They're good questions.
Yeah. So we do have some wells in the Nevins. So when we started doing these work plans, we would agree to put in 10 wells. So we would start putting some up in the source area, some on the migration pathway area, and some into the residential neighborhood. Because again, 375 acres, this is a large site. Most of the Nevins wells that were there from the RI were removed. So we have many, many wells that were moved during the development. So that's why right now we don't have a lot of
Yeah, but
wells.
we had a whole bunch just put in recently.
Right, those are
Right.
the ones that were part of those work plans. So those are the wells they were looking for. See that large blue line?
Yeah.
There is a significant liniment feature that they were following, and they were looking for that well.
Yeah.
That's what they were putting, and they were looking to see how does it migrate through the Nevins, and is it following this thing? So again, they put one well in, they got very little water, they moved 4 feet, they're getting 50 gallons. So we found that feature where water wants to move.
Right.
And again, so they did find that. So those were significant
Right.
data that
Okay.
we were provided. The Nevins came with a warranty date. So when they built the Nevins, they agreed that they would, one, be on sewer, two, be on the water line. So those mitigated those risks for the Nevins.
Right.
The vapor intrusion that you're talking about, the coming in from the soils. So the agreement was that the developer would put vapor intrusion systems at the facility. Now, we've had this conversation.
Right. And they were supposed to be, like you said, no basements. Supposed to be no
Right.
basements, and they were supposed to put in vapor intrusion systems.
Right, but then it did.
We
get-
don't have vapor intrusion
Right.
in my basement.
Right, and then some of this got modified. So I think we have put that, we've identified it in those 5-year reviews that I talk about, where we say, hey, you know, what do we have at the site? What are potential risks, and what do we need further investigation on?
Right.
The VI, the vapor intrusion in the Nevins is one of those.
Yeah,
one
it's
of those
huge.
comments.
It's huge.
So
It's
that's
a
something
huge
that they'll
thing.
look at. What they have done over time, the responsible parties here, what they've done is they've looked at concentrations in the shallow wells, because that's going to give you an indication.
Right.
What do you have contaminants? Is there a potential? And typically they're too far away. It's not primarily because you don't have a lot of overburden groundwater moving in that direction.
But, and to your point, you can no longer have a house sold without the realtor letting you know. We got that passed at the state last year, so.
And I want to speak
Two
to
more
the.
questions.
Yeah.
Two more answers.
Okay, you go first, then I'll go.
Yeah, so the risk pathway, I'm gonna go down to that one. So when I said yes, I know, it's because, again, there are many ways we can evaluate risk. PFAS is an emerging contaminant. We don't have all of the ways you can be exposed to PFAS. The big ones they've worked on is the ingestion. That
I
is your
understand that,
primary
but it's-
pathway. So we're not saying it doesn't happen with the other ones, but the primary risk is going to be from ingestion. So once we trigger the unacceptable risk, we're not saying it doesn't
I
have risk
understand
from
that.
the other ones.
I understand.
But
It's
we
just
may not
more
be able to
studies
calculate
have
it.
come out recently.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, more studies in the past year and a half have come out. Big time, big scientific studies have come out about the PFAS being absorbed through the biggest organ in your body.
Right, and I think there's a lot of articles that have come out with people, being more aware of what consumer products have PFAS, so they're
Right,
for their own protections.
right,
As far as
right.
that, but that's out of their control. For us, we looked at ingestion; it's the highest.
I just was concerned
exposure.
about the cancer risk because
Yeah.
I don't think that's totally,
It may not be encumbersome of the other pathways, but it does. It gives us the basis to
yeah.
take the action.
See, I have the advantage of having a medical background, but for Joe doesn't have a medical background, I just don't think that's totally informing them.
Right.
I think you need to tell them, people, that you can absorb large amounts through your skin.
Is that what you want to say? Nicole?
Yeah, and the other thing is that I'm trying to get Eversource to test our water at site water, because the big testing at site, which is like $700 that tests at my site, and Pennachuck, sorry, and they won't do that. So that's one thing to consider too. So,
And I'll just speak to the larger point you made about awareness of PFAS, especially like Cheryl said, in products and things like that. That is something the EPA focuses on in a larger scale about, trying to maybe avoid some products that have PFAS. Obviously like cookware is a big conversation.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, in the Superfund program, this is what we deal with.
Yeah,
But
I
that
know.
larger conversation is happening at EPA.
know,
And
I
I do
hated-
agree with you that
I hated to give up my Gore-Tex hiking jacket. So.
yeah. And it's a big conversation that EPA is talking about with people, and we're definitely trying to educate people more about that. So
you.
I appreciate that comment. Thank you.
I'd also just put a little plug in for my friends at the environmental health program in the back of the room. If anybody had specific health related questions that they wanted to talk about with an expert on that topic, you guys are welcome to see that.
Yeah, they're very good. So what they can do is you can tell them about your individual results and your own circumstances, and they can talk to you about, what that might mean for you and ways to reduce it, that we don't on the engineering side of doing the water line. So I think that having them at this meeting, I'm very excited. It's a great resource.
Hi. First, I want to express my anger. I wasn't here at the first meeting, but I've been in my house since 1997. Moved in there with twin boys who were, months old. Since then, in 2018, I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism, which is a direct link. My husband has been diagnosed with CML, again, a direct link. My dog had a sarcoma, 3 times was operated on, again, a direct link. So that's my anger. And that's why I'm really angry about this whole thing, because we were never told about any of this. And then the other thing is, when lines have come through Tocanel before, access lines, there's lines underneath that road. When they put in those lines, they damage the road in such a way that I now have a pool at the bottom of my driveway every time it rains. So I want that mitigated this time around, that when they put in these access lines, if they're going to put in, actually do a study and actually mitigate the problem. And the other thing, I don't understand why the lines are going to have to be put in if a reverse osmosis system is available. Why can't we utilize a reverse osmosis?
I think
We have it, and we're over the limits. Even with the reverse.
Even with the reverse osmosis? All right.
I think first I just want to say I'm sorry to hear all of that, and I appreciate you coming up here and sharing that with us. And Cheryl kind of talked about, when ultimately the remedy is chosen, there is that design phase, and there will be, the sponsor party, the Cannon Site Group, the Cannon Site Group who represents the sponsor party, they'll be having meetings with homeowners individually, and that's the time when you can speak about these concerns that you had talking about, the pawning that happened after the road got torn up. So I would say that, obviously you're going to remember that happened. And when that conversation happens, definitely bring that up and say, hey, this happened last time and I don't want this to happen again. And EPA and the state, we are the oversight. So we do oversight on the design process. So we're going to obviously take a look at that, thoroughly, but definitely remember these things when those individual meetings happen, because those are things that I would never know unless you had just told me.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
yeah.
I lived there, I went through it, I don't know, whatever is next to our complex, whatever was built in, all those new houses that are behind Ross,
Okay.
those lines came through Tokenel.
Okay.
And I have a stupid question only because I don't know.
No stupid questions. Trust me.
What happens when the lines come through? Is that for sewage also?
It would just be for alternative drinking water.
Just,
Yeah.
so we still have
The septic
the
system.
septics.
Still have
Correct.
septic,
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
No problem. Thanks.
I have it's ice down there, you have to pick at it to
I don't want to feel left out.
Okay.
Okay, so now on your map about where the water's going to be going, the area where I live, you're going to have to blast to get down. Now, what happens if your blasting destroys the well I have? Am I just out of luck?
No. I mean, blasting is one of the options. What was the other option?
Yeah, it depends on the type of bedrock that's there and how hard it is. What they'll try and do is bedrock or blasting is expensive, so it's usually the last resort. Usually they'll try and rip it with machines, or they'll use a hoe ram to kind of break it up. You've probably seen those things that kind of pop, 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 pop. They'll try and break it up that way. It depends on how deep they have to go. Depends on how shallow the rock is, and how soft or how what we call rippable the rock is. But it's possible that they may have to blast.
Okay, so if they just beat it, my question still stands. If while they're doing all this work, they destroy my well.
So, but I guess I don't understand if
So I remember this conversation. So the conversation is that there was blasting up by the Home Depot, and you guys ended up
Yeah,
getting
I'm on Ross.
right. You ended up getting all that material in your well. So remember, we tested that well. There was
right. But if
doing the
you're
public
if your
test.
wells if you're going to be connected to the water line, you're not going to be using your well anymore. Is that right?
The water line has to be built first before they can connect to me.
Oh, I see what you're saying. In the
So
interim.
I'm gonna be living on the well until they get the water line there.
Right.
So what are they building?
Yeah. No, I get you. Well, certainly for drinking water, you wouldn't be drinking the water because you'll be on bottled water while that's going in.
he's not involved.
I,
He's 9 months.
Oh, okay.
the thing I was told was if I got the bottled water, I had to pay for the line to go to the house.
Well, no.
No.
So that's what I was told. If I was to get the bottled water, I'd have to pay for the line to the house.
No, so the bottled water is a requirement under the state that if the sampling indicated at a level above a drinking water standard, the offer for bottled water is the only temporary mitigation that is required. So those are the people on bottled water. They're not paying for it. They get the offer. The water line extension is part of this action. So that wouldn't be part of your responsibility.
I think the bottom line is if anything happens to your well during the process, it would have to be fixed.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be your responsibility to fix it. Someone would have to take, or the responsible party would have to take care of that. If something got damaged as a result of the construction work during the interim process, they would have to make it right.
And I'm definitely not an expert in construction, but I've worked on other sites where there is active construction that happens, and prior to that happening, they do have people that go out and assess around where they'd be doing it, take pictures of it to make sure, there's people that are expert in that look at that. I'm not saying nothing can happen because there's always a chance, but there would be people that would go out and take a look at that. But I do hear concern about.
The crew doing Home Depot when they just destroyed my water system said, "Oh, just send us our lawyers. Our lawyers will talk to them."
Yeah.
I'm like, I got 3 kids. How can I afford lawyers?
Yeah. No.
And I'm glad that now, because when I moved in 2000, no one told me there was a Superfund site there.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they have to disclose that now.
Yeah, we have heard that. I think that's what happens when, they come in and there's a lot of activity and it quiets down because there's a little bit of monitoring. But there's been a monitoring program since 2003. The state of New Hampshire has been sampling in the neighborhood. We do have data from 1984 through until the PRPs took it over in 2018. But I do think that seems to be the information, is that, we think there's a site, but we think the site is a small area, which is why I wanted to make sure I posted that picture and said, these are all the areas that are included in the site.
Because I moved up from Massachusetts, and there they have to disclose if there's anything within a reasonable distance, and, well, that's reasonable.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? So are you on bottled water?
No.
No,
Have you been offered bottled water?
no, his well results are
His
low.
results are below.
Both sides of me are getting bottled water.
Okay, but because the levels are below.
It gets back to that picture I showed with one home can be clean, the home right next to him could be, he's a perfect example of
He's
that.
actually got the golden well. He
Gotcha.
keeps coming back clean.
Right.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions?
So I just want to add too, this was to get you to know what the plan is and what it entails, and let you have some questions. We do have a comment period. Normally what happens is that, once we finalize the information and we negotiate and we're going forward with the design, we would come back and have another meeting. This is the design. This is what we're going to do. We'll find some way to, have an outpost out there that you don't have to come to these meetings, that we have a way for you to access the information. One of the things Aaron developed was a community involvement plan. And in that plan, which is online, and we spoke to the town offices about it, it's an unusual site. We have 5 different neighborhoods. We have nearly 2,000 people that live near the site. So it's difficult sometimes when you have to send out a mailing to 2,000 people, but really you just want to talk to the people in just Nevins or at the condo area because you're doing something. So what we tried to do is break up the community involvement. So there might be times when we say we're sending information to the condo to distribute because work will be going on in there. And maybe there'll be time over here. Because it might get, it's a little busy with that. But we are trying to find better ways to do that. One of the other things, we love Zoom, we love Teams. If you want a one-on-one conversation, we're available. I know many of the sites do Teams calls for status updates. We talked to the town about doing more status updates and what would be the better mechanism for that. So we are having those discussions because, we gave you a little bit of information. Personally, I could have talked for 5 hours. There's a lot of information, and I think we are, we're willing to do that. We're just trying to make sure we do it the right way.
I'm sure you want to wrap up here, but tomorrow, is there any comment tomorrow?
Yeah, so I was going to get into that right now for everyone. So for how to get involved. So today was the informational meeting. Tomorrow, starting tomorrow to August 12th, is a public comment period. It's 30 days. This is, part of the process we do for all Superfund sites. So during that time, we're going to have a public hearing here on July 29th, 6 p.m., where people can orally make a comment. Similar situation. The difference is that we won't be doing a presentation. It's a little awkward, but like I said, this law was passed in 1980, so this is kind of how
we
it was
do
done.
we do a mini presentation, but when you provide the oral comments as a stenographer and you can do the oral comments, we can't respond to you like we're doing now. We can do that. We have to wait till it's over. We can't do it during that because they're recording all the comments.
Yeah, so that's the time where you can make your comment orally. Come here and do that. We'll have you take your comment down. Or there's other ways, which are listed there, and that's kind of listed in preference. So the first one is this website called regulation.gov. It has the proposed plan on there. It has the administrative record with all the supporting documents, and it has a way that you can just write your comment online. Second way is you could...
Just to add to that, so this is a new procedure, so we're probably only the 3rd one in New England that's actually used this regulations.gov. This is the way they're going, and so what happens is it all gets organized. So when you go in, it's going to say your primary document is the proposed plan. Do you want to do a comment? Yeah, you can answer it anonymous comment. You can put your name on it. You can do, when you get in there, you're going to type in your comment. So you can type it in. You can type in as many as you want. You can put your name. You can put your contact. But that'll get published. So just so you know, if you put your name, it'll come back to us with your name. If you want to be anonymous, that's different. So that just...
Yeah. No, that's important to say. And the second thing would be email to Cheryl. You could do it that way. And third, if you really want to, you could mail it to our office in Boston. I think the first 2 ways might be a little bit easier, but I do get mail sometimes. And the last thing I'll say is that there's the documents related to the site are on the town's website, which will link us there, and also on our website. And throughout the comment period, if you have questions about how to comment, my contact information and Cheryl's is inside of the proposed plan. Just call us, send an email, and we will help you comment. We can't help you with what your comment is, but we can help you during the comment period, but we can help you how to comment on the proposed plan.
So just to add, the administrative record grows with the site, so it's part of the supporting documentation. So when you have multiple actions at a site, your administrative record becomes voluminous. So you can have thousands of documents in this administrative record because one builds upon the other. So all of the documents that supported the initial remedies are all built upon it. So one of the things to make it easier is that Aaron and Kirsten worked together and they put that website up for the town. And what they did is they shared the RI summary memorandum, which gives you a short on all of the investigations at the site that was pertinent. It gives you the focus feasibility study in all of its details with the risk assessment. It gives you the proposed plan. The other thing that we added was some information on protecting yourself from PFOA. And then I added this little document here. This came from EPA headquarters in 1994. And what it does is it talks about how Tinkham became polluted. It talks about how there's 4 sites that are connected and how they got connected and why the material ended up here. So we did put all of that there so that you don't have to go through all of these documents. We wanted to have a resource, and we really appreciate the town letting us have that tab to put this information. And I guess this presentation is going to go there too.
Yeah. And then I think you had a question.
Can I just
Yeah.
finish what I was saying?
Yeah, no, go ahead. Sure.
Okay, so it appears as though we have a deadline here, because you folks have to present this in September, right?
Yeah. Basically, we have to,
No.
complete it. Yeah.
So we have a limited amount of time here, okay? But a lot of folks have been waiting for this for a long period of time,
Right.
okay? We've been hearing about this since last fall.
Mm-hmm.
January, February, March, April, May, June, July, here we are, okay? And this is very important to these citizens that have been impacted,
Right.
all right? So, tomorrow, the 11th, is there an opportunity for anyone to have any further discussion with you folks?
I think we go live at 5. So
Yeah. So
if there's a comment in the morning, I think we can respond, but I believe we go live at 5
So someone would have to call you
in the morning, yeah.
yeah, or
on the phone.
email or one of those. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, yeah. I haven't heard anything here about Hadley Aldridge. Have they not been monitoring this site since the beginning?
I don't know who's the contract in the beginning. I'm not sure, but recently. Yeah.
Haley and Aldridge, well, they were a former contractor, but yeah, they've been part of the site since the 1990s.
And the results of their studies?
Those are all available. Those are part of that administrative record. So they sample.
Does the town have that?
They have access to it. It's all on the websites. It's not on the town site because we're trying to keep that narrowly focused. But all of those documents are on New Hampshire DES One Stop, or they're on the EPA website.
But Jim,
So-
your conceptual model is based on Haley and Aldrich's H&A's results, isn't it?
They're collecting the data. I mean, they're doing the investigations, they're, drilling the
they're-
wells,
but-
and they've been doing this work for a while. So, and there's phases of it. Again, they did some treatment, that thing ended, we went to long-term monitoring, then they do, additional investigations, that becomes a report, then they go forward and we
Aren't
do
they
additional work.
contracted by the responsible parties?
They are the contractor to them.
But going back to my question though, Jim, so the information that you come up with, your conceptual model, is based upon the water quality results that H&A is
In part, yeah.
in part.
Yeah, I mean, this goes all the way back, or our summary report goes all the way back to the beginning, so to the 70s when this site was first investigated. So
Yeah.
the initial investigations were done by New Hampshire. There were some done by the state, there were some done by EPA, and then at that point, they identified who the responsible party was, and they got them involved, and they took over And then they did that. So this compiles all of that data.
Yeah, so again, and
they do
and
collect the
water
data now.
quality results are bad.
Yeah.
Plain
Yeah,
and
yeah.
simple.
Right, they've been collecting the residential data and then the on-site
So
data,
the-
as
the-
required. They've
The,
been-
the
they've been-
data of the testing done by Aldridge is what you've been using.
Yes, yes.
Right.
I think I would add that EPA, we have,
Well, the EPA hasn't been doing any testing themselves.
I hear on that, but what I was going to say is that we have analytical methods that like are people at our lab that people have to follow when taking samples.
So we have work plans where we discuss what we're going to do, how many wells we're gonna put in, what kind of testing we're gonna do, how many analysis we're gonna do, and then we get to approve it. So I get to approve those work plans, so I get to approve the work, and then we have oversight. They go in the field, they collect the information, they provide a report, and then we discuss the report.
Yeah, but
That's the
you
process.
get my point is
Yeah.
you're using information from Hadley Aldrich that is hired by the responsible parties.
Mm-hmm.
I would have preferred if the testing was actually done by the US EPA.
And I think I hear you on that, and I do see your point. But ultimately, and this is with typically all sites that have identified responsible parties, is we are holding them responsible for not only financially, doing the remedy, but also implementing it. And we do the oversight on it. So typically, when there's responsible parties, this is part of the process. We want to make sure that they're doing the work that they're supposed to be doing.
Well, they haven't been doing much work for some time.
Well, they've been doing the work in accordance with the work plans.
Thank you.
That's how we do it.
We also split samples on occasion too. Like Cheryl said, Weston Solutions. That's one of our tasks that we do is oversight. So we're kind of looking over Hadley and Aldrich's shoulder. We're watching them in the field. We're watching them collect their samples. And from time to time, we split samples. So we'll collect the sample. They'll collect the sample. We run it at a different lab. They run it at a different lab, and we make sure the results match. So they're not just wild west out there doing stuff. We're keeping an eye on them, making sure that everything that they did. And Hadley and Aldrich is a very reputable firm.
Right.
They're
no
professional, well respected in the state, and they do good work.
Right, we have no concerns.
Thank you.
I just had probably a stupid question, but where's the 6.8 million coming from? Who's paying that? And is it there? Is it in a pot of gold right now to pay it out?
I wish. So normally what we do is we send out, because we have a consent decree with responsible parties, and these are big corporations, they have money.
I understand.
So, what'll happen is if they negotiate and they agree to perform the work, they agree to finance it. So it would come from them. If if the negotiations turn differently, then EPA has choices. Either we can perform it ourselves or we can issue an order and require them to do it. I mean, there's many paths we can take. Obviously, we want the first path, which is a coordinated, cooperative path forward. Obviously, that's.
So in terms of, let's say your recommendation is this water line, and it's for 6.8 million. That will not be decided until after this public comment period. And let's say that comes back and all the residents say, yay, water line, I like that idea. Is it already established with the responsible parties, or is that when the negotiation
That's
starts?
when the negotiations start. So we
So
come up
you-
with a remedy.
So you don't have any idea whether or not they would step forward at that point and say, yes, we're going to put the water line in?
I think there's multiple aspects to it. I think, from our discussions, they support the water line. The same party, Mike Skinner, that represents the supervising contractor, and Todd, that, represents these parties. They work with us on other sites. They've implemented water lines on other sites in New Hampshire. This is not new to them. The reason why we're doing it, the aspects of it, they might have differences with EPA, but in the end, we're going to negotiate how to do it. I mean, again, this is a long-term project. We're still looking at, it's a big site with multiple areas of sources. We're trying to figure out, what's the long-term gain here. We don't know what we can do with groundwater in the short term. We don't know if we will be able to clean up groundwater. We're still looking at that, but we know we can mitigate risk. And so, they would have to make that decision. Obviously, we have supervising people that work with us that are technical and really much on par with us. And then you've got, their lawyers, and you've got parties, and they're all going to have their say, and they're going to have their position. But this is what we do consistently
Right.
when it comes down to work. And
But just, I'm just thinking.
one way or another,
Thinking,
one way or another, we're not, EPA is not concerned. So, if we negotiate and they say, no, they're not going to do it, we have our options. And we're going to use our options, whether we enforce and issue an order or we fund it ourselves. Those are the decisions EPA will make at the time.
And
But-
do they have the ability as you go along with this and let's say that they're saying, no, we don't want that. We'll only do this. Will it end up in court maybe, and then you're fighting a case in court and to enforce an EPA order? So I'm thinking that this process that we're thinking, start, sometime after September or next spring or something, will go on for another 10
EPA,
years.
Right, and that's a great question. So EPA has options. Again, like I said, we work with, our lawyers, we work with the Department of Justice. If that's the situation and, we end up down a path that's not going forward, EPA is the choice. We could fund the design. We could get the design fully funded, and we could say, here's the design, it's done now. I don't suspect we're going to have that kind of trouble, but if it is, I think these parties have been talking for 45 years. I think we all know each other pretty well, and I think we're gonna work on that path. And I think in the end, everyone wants the same end point. It's just a matter of how we get there. It won't change the remedy per se, unless some comments change it, whatnot. But how we pay for it is just something EPA does, and how we negotiate.
And right now, you don't have a feel for where they're heading on this process.
No,
You say that they've
we'll
been
send
in it
them a
for
letter like we
45
do, yeah.
years.
Yep.
You don't have that idea at this
We don't,
point.
but they do. This is, they've already been cleaning it up for 45 years. They did sign a consent decree, and they have done a lot of what we've asked, and they're out there, and they want to get it restored. Most of these sites take a long time. This is a drain on them as well. So, typically what we find is, they're also interested in looking at the data and seeing what they can do and managing it.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to say that this proposed plan, we're Region 1 in New England, headquarters in DC also saw this, and EPA is committed to this project as well. So you have our commitment to getting this done.
Right. This is passed through our headquarters.
Yeah.
Does that go all the way to the top?
I don't know.
Sorry, that was just.
Honestly, this administration has been, pretty vocal about, supporting, providing clean water. So I think we're fine on that.
I just want to know, it's going to take a few years for this to happen, to get a water line in place. I had an opportunity to be connected. I was asking them to connect, but my well was clean, and it still is clean. Haley came over and did all the checking and supplied everything, and it was good. But then they stopped coming. So now I go and pay to have my well tested,
Yeah.
and I don't understand why I have to do this.
That's what the GMP. So yeah, and that was one of the issues under the GMP, the older GMP. There was a component of it where if it was a compound was not detected for 3 rounds, then that compound might get dropped off.
Yeah.
That got a little more complicated because one, the concentrations we were looking at got lower. For PFAS, it came down significantly. Initially, we were looking at 70 nanograms per liter, and then 40, and then 4, and then even lower. So over time, if we have to keep sampling the well. So we went back, I believe it was the last 2 Novembers, and we did request that people that hadn't been sampled in a while got resampled. So I don't know what house number you are, and Renee can maybe speak to it.
And you don't have to say your address out here, but we can look up and see what schedule you may or may not be on.
Right, and we did try to address that in the last 2 November rounds where we put together a list and said, hey, it looks like we might be missing this person, or they stopped, some of the residents stopped getting data previously, but it's because they were told it's okay. But at the time, we were using a much higher standard at the time. So
Right.
we kept saying, we need to go back and get back to them and get that data again, because now we're using a lower standard to use for that. So, so I know Amy has been diligently, making a lot of calls to residents, and we talk about it in our meetings, did they say yes? Who do we have? So we do talk about each and every resident and trying to make sure, and like I said, I think overall, there's a lot, but again, the way we did the risk was for the groundwater average, so we were able to do that.
Yeah, on my point, Haley Aldrich was good. They were very nice. They come into the basement, do their thing, do all the testing.
Yep.
And I called them to try to get them to come back. They felt a little odd about doing that, so I went to a different source. But it's drinking water, it's
Yeah, it's important.
showering, and
Yeah.
Right.
make sure. Because my next door neighbor,
They don't have.
he's got town water now. Okay, but he was real sick,
Yeah.
so I didn't
Yeah.
want that to
So
happen.
maybe you can talk to Renee about the permit and the schedule.
Yeah.
Well, I'll send it in. There's
Okay.
a couple, I have many more things to
Yep.
do. We all want to go home.
Yeah, we've kept you guys.
But that was my key point. You may not like Haley Aldrich or you has an issue, but they were good with me, so I
They're-
have to
yes,
speak up
yes,
for
they're
that.
good.
But it was good. Okay.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
It's not really
Yeah.
to you guys so much as it's to you guys. I don't know if you know this, but Sharon Carson is a state senator. She's actually the president of the state senate. And whether you agree with the politics or not, I won't argue that. But she's actually one of the affected folks. So, no, based on hearing her phone calls, she's probably still in Concord. But independent of, we don't want her radiating hatred over the EPA, plus they're federal and they won't care. But specific to Pennachuck, okay? Specific to questions we have about the installation quality, specific to that stuff, any comments you might have for this, she's still your state senator, and she's invested, so maybe
So-
consider it.
So I'm going to add to that. So prior to coming out, we do this policy of no surprises. So we did meet with the town and the offices just to let them know that we're coming out. Most of our discussion was about, the process, how we would run the meeting, how do the comments go, just trying to keep people informed because sometimes there's large gaps of this kind of thing. And we did the same thing. We touch base. EPA touches base. Aaron's office specifically is always online, and we update congressionals and state senators, and she was on the call when I did an update.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if it was staffers from, I don't know if it was both senators. I think Shaheen, I don't know if it was Pappas, was there all, I don't know if I think staffers from all office were actually in the meeting. We updated them.
So we do up them and just in case, because what we want to make sure is that they're aware of the situation so that if somebody were to call them, they at least know what's happening. There's a remedy coming out. This is what we're offering. This is the situation. So we do that as an upfront media thing.
So I have a question. So the Democrats have been touting that they brought in all this money to the state, 9.9 million last year, 9.4 million this year, to specifically address these problems with PFAS. Where is all that money? How is it being dog-eared? Where is it accounted for? I haven't seen anything, and I'd really like to see some results.
I don't, yeah, that's a question I don't know the answer to.
I don't know that that's a Renee
I think that's
question.
he's above her pay grade.
But yeah, I'm not familiar with the numbers you're referencing, but if you have specific, you can direct me to specific initiatives or grants or something of that nature. I might be able to get some more information for you.
There was money, other federal money, also set aside specifically for small towns. There was another one, and then folks that had wells. Well, we
Right.
all have wells.
So yes, you're speaking about the rebate program.
It's got to be.
It's got to be the rebate program. So yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's a good question. The state of New Hampshire does implement a PFAS, let's call it a response program, and essentially offers different types of rebates to residences who are impacted by PFAS contamination, but it does not apply to the Tinkham Garage site. It's only for sites that don't have an identified responsible party. So really it's to help individuals, residences who there isn't someone else who can fund that work. So that is a program that's operated and still active, just doesn't apply in this
And
case.
then I have another question that has nothing to do with our problem, but the, Steve's, dry cleaning, which is on the shopping center. He's been dumping stuff, I was gonna say a bad word, behind where he is, and the people behind that have houses, there's been cyanide in their wells. How does this all happen? How do you people not monitor this better?
So we do monitor some of those issues. One thing that can be done is residences or, New Hampshire residents can report concerns or issues that they may have. We do have a hotline for that. So if there's, if you have specific information you'd like to share about something that we may or may not be aware of, that dry cleaning, dry cleaning is an existing DES site. I believe it is closed currently, but it was and has been monitored in the past, and certainly I can get more information to you on that specific site if you like. It certainly documents, just like the Tinkham Garage site documents for other types of remedial sites that are overseen by the state versus by the federal agencies, are available on our website. I can also connect you with a specific project manager who may know a lot more about those sites than I do. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have specific questions about other issues in the area.
So I think that's one thing you're pointing out. There is industrial releases that happen in other places. So Tinkham is not unique in that, the town of London has their St. Cobain issue. Every town has their issues, and there's multiple ones. And not everybody's in charge of everything. For Superfund, you had to get onto the list. So we're specific to these, and that's because they usually impacted a lot of people. The state sites might be handled differently, and they might be of many different facets. But there's a lot of different smaller sites that are around. And they're being managed at different aspects. Some are closed, some are open.
Yep, and like I said, there is a lot of information that actually is available to the public on those types of sites. We have an interactive map online, and again, I'm happy to share and talk one-on-one if you like. But there's an interactive map where you can pull up your location and identify sites that might be near you outside of the Tinkham Garage site, and often many of the documents associated with those sites are available online for public access.
Okay. It is 8:06 p.m. Any questions from anyone? Any additional questions?
Thank you for finally getting us a water line.
No problem. Thank you for your patience.